When my son was ordered to clean toilets by his father-in-law on day 1, the insult stung. So I remember the moment my life split into a before and an after. It happened in a place no mother expects to see her grown child brought to his knees, a company restroom that smelled of bleach and humiliation. I stepped through the doorway, my hand still on the handle, and for a second my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. My son, my Jerome, the boy I had carried on my hip and pushed through school and watched graduate with honors, was kneeling on the cold tile floor in front of a toilet, a filthy rag clutched in his trembling hands. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Standing over him, like a judge handing down a sentence, was Sterling Thorne. He was Jerome's father-in-law, the owner of the entire building, the kind of man people whispered about in awe because of the size of his house, his bank account, and his arrogance. His laughter crashed against the tiled walls, loud and ugly, filling the room like smoke. 2 other men in expensive suits were leaning against the sinks not far behind him, watching my son scrub the base of the toilet like he was entertainment laid on especially for them. "There he is," Sterling bellowed, his voice booming. "Your brilliant boy with the honors degree." He tilted his head toward the hallway, where someone else was standing in the doorway. 30 years old, college-educated, and look at what he's good for. "Hey Taylor, your husband finally found his real calling." I turned and saw her. Taylor, my daughter-in-law. She was framed in the doorway in a fitted dress, her hair perfect as always, her lips painted, her arms folded as she leaned casually against the jamb. My heart begged her to rush forward, to tell her father to stop, to stand between Jerome and this cruelty. Instead, she stayed right where she was, the corners of her mouth tipped up in a satisfied smile as though she had just been handed front-row seats to a show she had been waiting to see. Jerome looked up and his eyes collided with mine. The shame on his face hit me like a physical blow. His cheeks were wet, his jaw tight, his mouth shaking. "Mom," he choked, the single word breaking apart on his tongue. My proud, strong son, who had promised me the world when he was 10, was kneeling on a dirty floor in front of men who thought nothing of wiping their feet on his dignity. I wanted to throw myself at Sterling, to claw his smug expression off his face. I wanted to grab Taylor by those narrowed shoulders and ask her if this was what love meant to her. I wanted to scoop Jerome up like I did when he was little and carry him away from this filthy place. Instead, I did the one thing that made sense if I wanted to protect my son in the long run. I turned around and walked out. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because at that moment I understood that if I stayed 1 second longer, I might do something that would land me in handcuffs and leave Jerome even more alone than he already felt. But as I stepped back into the corridor and let the door swing shut behind me, I made myself a quiet promise. Every tear my son shed in that restroom would be paid for. Every mocking laugh, every word meant to strip him of his worth, would be tallied and settled. I didn't know how yet. But I knew I was done watching from the sidelines. To explain why I was willing to risk everything for that promise, I have to go back to where it all began, long before Taylor and her father, when it was just me, a 3-month-old baby, and an empty apartment. At 28, I thought I had finally built something like stability. I had a husband, a chubby baby boy named Jerome, and a small, cramped apartment at the edge of the city where the streetlights flickered and buses rattled by at all hours. The couch was second-hand, the wallpaper was peeling, and the neighbors sometimes argued through thin walls, but it was ours. I would wake up in the middle of the night, hear Jerome's soft breathing from his crib, feel the warmth of my husband next to me, and think, this is enough. This is good. Then one ordinary morning, I woke to a silence that felt wrong. The other side of the bed was cold. Jerome was sleeping peaceably. In the kitchen, on the table stained with old coffee rings, lay a note. Just one small rectangle of paper, the handwriting slightly uneven, like it had been written in a hurry or with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. Don't look for me." That was all. No explanation, no apology I could accept or reject. Just a declaration and a command. The man whose last name I carried, whose promises I had believed, was simply gone. His closet was empty. His toothbrush had vanished from the bathroom sink. The ring he had placed on my finger meant nothing to him anymore, but to me it felt suddenly heavier, like a shackle. For a few days, I existed in a fog. I went through the motions, feeding Jerome, changing him, rocking him, while my mind replayed every moment of our life together, looking for a clue I might have missed. Had I said something wrong? Had he been unhappy and I had been too exhausted to notice? There were no answers, only the hollow ache in my chest and the cold reality waiting for me each time I opened the refrigerator door and saw how little food was left. Eventually, the fog burned away and the truth stood in front of me, sharp and unmerciful. No one was coming to save me. No husband would walk back through that door to say it was a mistake. No relative would sweep in and offer to pay the rent. It was just me, my baby, and the city outside that didn't care whether we made it or not. So I worked. I found a job as a cashier at a grocery store, standing on my feet all morning under bright fluorescent lights, scanning items and forcing a polite smile for customers who barely glanced at me. After that, I scrubbed offices in a glass building downtown, moving silently from desk to desk long after the real workday ended. When other people were going home for dinner and television, I was filling buckets with soap and water to drag up stairwells in apartment blocks, scrubbing steps and handrails until my fingers were raw. Sleep became this thin, fragile thing that I squeezed into the cracks of my schedule. 4 hours if I was lucky, 3 if Jerome cried. I stopped measuring my life in days and started measuring it in paychecks. Every dollar had a destination before it even reached my hands. Rent, diapers, formula, bus fare. Luxury, for me, became buying a new pair of socks without holes. I never walked into clothing stores unless something had worn out so badly it was an embarrassment. Jerome outgrew clothes faster than I could blink, but I found ways. Clearance racks, thrift shops, hand-me-downs from a neighbor whose sister had too many things for her child. The first time I bought Jerome a brand new backpack for kindergarten, one that had never been worn by another child, I felt like I had conquered a mountain. I had spent 6 months putting aside a few dollars at a time, skipping bus rides to walk, saying no to coffee breaks, keeping clothes until they were more patches than fabric. When he stood in the doorway that first day of school, his backpack bright and unused, his shoes clean, his hair brushed carefully, he looked like all the other children, and that tiny sameness was my victory. Jerome was always watching me. Even as a small boy, he seemed to understand that our life took more effort than it did for others. When I would come home after a late cleaning shift, the apartment smelling of disinfectant and sweat, he would offer to warm up leftovers, or he would quietly put his toys away without being told. He never whined for things other kids bragged about having. Sometimes I would catch him looking around our small living room with a thoughtful, serious expression that did not belong on the face of a child. One evening, when he was about 9, he sat down beside me on the worn couch, hands clasped, eyes determined. "Mama," he said, with a certainty that startled me, "I'm going to study really hard. I'll go to a good college. I'll get a good job. Then you won't have to work all the time anymore. I promise." Promises from adults had already proven fragile. But this came from my son, whose eyes were too honest to lie, and somehow I believed him. Years slid by, marked by report cards and birthdays, by extra shifts and late bus rides. Jerome kept his word in ways I hadn't even dared to hope. At school, his teachers praised him. He brought home grades that made my tired heart swell. He didn't just pass, he excelled. When the college letters came, one thick envelope stood out from the others, and inside was the miracle we needed, a full scholarship. Tuition, books, everything covered. At his graduation from college, I sat in a sea of parents dressed better than I had ever been in my life. They whispered about internships and family businesses, about trust funds and investment accounts. I sat quietly in my best second-hand dress, my hands folded in my lap, and when they called my son's name with the words, "with high honors," tears blurred my vision. Every sleepless night, every aching muscle, every moment I had wanted to give up but didn't. Suddenly, it all had a meaning bigger than survival. My son walked across that stage tall and confident, the world open in front of him. I thought then that his troubles were over. I was wrong. After graduating, Jerome didn't waste any time. He landed his first job quickly, at a mid-sized company called Swiftline Logistics. It wasn't the kind of name that impressed people at fancy parties, but it was honest work. They handled routes, deliveries, schedules, keeping goods moving from place to place. It was exactly the sort of thing his degree in logistics and operations had prepared him for. He called me the day he signed the contract. It was late evening, and I had just taken off my shoes, my feet throbbing from standing behind a grocery register all day. The phone lit up with his name, and before I could say hello, his excitement poured through the line. "Mom, they hired me," he burst out. "Office job, official contract, benefits, the whole thing. I start tomorrow." I could hear the smile in his voice. It warmed me from the inside out. I leaned back against the faded couch cushion and closed my eyes, letting myself imagine him in a clean office, wearing the suit he had bought for job interviews, carrying a briefcase instead of a bucket and rag. "I'm so proud of you, Rome," I said softly. "You did it." "The salary isn't huge," he went on, realistic as always. "About $1,900 a month. But it's a start. And I'm going to send you money every month, okay? I'll help with your rent so you can finally rest a bit." "You don't have to," I protested automatically. "You're just starting out. You'll need—" "I want to," he cut in firmly. "You carried me all these years. Let me carry you a little now." True to his word, he began sending $400 every month. He moved into a small apartment closer to work, lived modestly, cooked simple meals for himself, and skipped luxuries so he could keep his promise to me. That money meant more hours of sleep. It meant I could finally quit one of my 3 jobs. I left the stairwell cleaning behind and kept the grocery store and the office cleaning. 2 hats instead of 3. For the first time in decades, my evenings had space in them. I could come home while the sky was still a deep blue instead of pitch black, sit on the couch, and feel like a person who existed for something more than work. Once a week, Jerome came over for dinner. He always brought something small, a bag of fruit, a dessert, sometimes just a carton of milk he knew I was running low on. We would sit at my tiny kitchen table, sharing food and stories. He told me about his coworkers, about difficult routes they had to redesign, about how he was learning to manage tight deadlines and demanding clients. "I'm going to climb the ladder," he said one night, his eyes shining not with greed but with determination. "First I'll become a team lead, then a manager, then maybe head of the department. I don't want to stay at the bottom my whole life, Mom. I want more. Not just for money. For us." I brushed his hair back from his forehead, just as I had when he was a boy. "Take it step by step, Rome," I answered. "You're smart enough to get anywhere. Just remember who you are on the way up." For a while, life settled into something that almost looked peaceful. Jerome got a small raise. I grew used to having evenings free. I let myself dream about a future where my son would own a small house somewhere quiet, where I could visit on weekends and play with grandchildren who would never know what it meant to count coins before going to the store. Then, one ordinary evening in October, my phone rang, and I heard a new note in his voice. Nervousness, hope, and something like fear all tangled together. "Mama," he said, "are you sitting down?" "I am," I replied, though in truth I was standing in front of the stove, stirring a pot of soup. "What happened?" "I met someone," he blurted out. My hand tightened around the spoon. I had always wanted Jerome to find love, to have the family I had lost, but the suddenness of it sent a shiver through me. "Tell me about her," I said carefully. "Her name is Taylor," he said, and I could hear the smile stretching his voice. "We met at a business meeting. She came to our office from another company. Mom, she's amazing. Smart. Beautiful. Confidence. I didn't think a woman like her would even notice me." That sentence snagged in my chest. Didn't think she'd notice me. Why not? To me, he was everything any woman should want. Kind, responsible, hardworking, educated. But what I thought and what the world thought were 2 different things. "Of course she noticed you," I said softly. "You're worth noticing." I want you to meet her, he continued. This Saturday. We're thinking of a coffee shop near your place. Please, Mom. Of course, I answered, even as something deep inside me stirred uneasily. I'd be happy to. After I hung up, I stood in the quiet apartment and tried to analyze what I was feeling. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't fear losing my son to another woman. Not really. I had always known that one day he would build a life separate from mine. It was something else. A low, insistent whisper that something about this was too quick, too shiny. Saturday came faster than I wanted. I wore my one decent blouse, pressed carefully the night before. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection stared back at me, older than I felt inside. My hands were rough from years of chemicals and hot water, my eyes lined from strain and lack of sleep, but I lifted my chin. My son's girlfriend would not see a woman who had given up. I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a small table by the window. My stomach fluttered as I watched people come and go. When the door finally opened and Jerome walked in, my heart lightened. He looked happy, hands clasped around a delicate manicured hand. Taylor was beautiful. That was my first impression. Not pretty in an ordinary way, but polished, like someone who had always known how to occupy space. Her long dark hair fell in waves over a dress that looked expensive without shouting about it. A designer handbag hung on her arm, the brand's logo subtle but unmistakable to someone who had spent years walking past shop windows and mentally calculating what such luxuries must cost. Mom, this is Taylor, Jerome said eagerly. Taylor, this is my mother, Aisha Johnson. Taylor extended a hand, her fingers slender, her nails glossy and flawlessly shaped. For a moment I became painfully aware of my own hands. Thickened skin, broken nails, the faint smell of detergent that never quite washed away. I forced a smile and took her hand. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson, she said. Her smile was polite, but her eyes measured me, quick and clinical. There was something there, something small and sharp, like a needle hidden in lace. I caught it and filed it away. We sat. Jerome ordered coffees and cake, filling the empty air with stories about how they met. Taylor listened, occasionally nodding, but her own contribution to the conversation stayed thin. When I tried to involve her, asking about her work, her interests, her answers were concise, almost dismissive. I work in marketing, she said when I asked about her job. At my father's company. We manufacture components for the construction sector. Thorn Manufacturing Group. She said the name like it should mean something to me, like people in my position should automatically know and respect it. I nodded anyway. That sounds important, I said. It must be a lot of responsibility. She shrugged, as if responsibility were something she could pick up or put down as she pleased. Her gaze drifted around the modest coffee shop, lingering on the worn chairs and scuffed floor. I could see the unspoken judgment there, even if her lips kept quiet. Afterward, as Jerome walked me to the bus stop, he asked the question I had been dreading. So, Mom, he said anxiously, what do you think of her? I remembered the coolness in Taylor's eyes, the faint wrinkle of her nose when she noticed the fraying edge of my sleeve. I remembered the way she had spoken about her father's company like it was a kingdom and she was its princess. I wanted to say, be careful. There's a wall around her heart with your name written on it in chalk, ready to be wiped away. Instead, I smoothed his collar and swallowed my misgivings. The important thing is that you love her, I said quietly. If she makes you happy, that's what matters. He smiled in relief, and I let him keep that belief a little longer, even as the uneasy feeling inside me continued to grow. 3 months later, he called to tell me he had proposed and Taylor had accepted. They were planning a wedding. The woman whose eyes had slid over my thrift store blouse without really seeing it was about to become my daughter-in-law. The wedding plans took shape quickly, but not in the way my son would have chosen on his own. Jerome suggested renting a restaurant or a small banquet hall, something simple that wouldn't drown them in debt. Taylor shot down the idea before it had any chance to grow. We'll have it at my parents' estate, she insisted. Why would we settle for something cheap when we have access to something better? It's not every day a daughter of the Thorne family gets married. She said it with a laugh, light on the surface, but I heard the message underneath. This was her world, and Jerome was expected to fit himself into it, not the other way around. The day of the wedding arrived dressed in sunshine. I put on the new dress I had bought for the occasion after months of scrimping. It wasn't designer and it hadn't come from a boutique, but it was new and it fit well. As I smoothed it down in front of the mirror, I remembered the grim apartments I had scrubbed while Jerome was still in diapers and smiled faintly. If this wasn't happiness, it was at least a strange, proud milestone. Taylor's parents' house wasn't so much a house as a statement. Their country estate could have swallowed my entire apartment building. A tall fence enclosed manicured lawns and carefully arranged flower beds. Security guards checked invitations at the gate. Inside, marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers, and wide staircases curved gracefully upward like something from a movie. Paintings in gold frames stared down from the walls, and the air carried the faint scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. Guests floated through the hall in outfits that matched the house. Elegant, expensive, flawless. Their laughter sounded different from the laughter I was used to on buses and in break rooms, somehow more practiced, as if even joy had to be rehearsed and polished in this world. I stood near one of the walls, clutching my small handbag and feeling painfully aware of every thread in my dress. Conversations swirled around me, full of words like portfolio, and merger, and market position. No one spoke of aching backs or rent due dates. I shifted my weight from foot to foot, unsure where to place myself in this crowd of confidence. A tall man in a dark suit approached me, his steps slow and controlled. His hair was silver at the temples, his jaw firm, his eyes cold. He stopped a little too close and looked me over as though assessing a piece of furniture someone had brought into his house without permission. "You must be the groom's mother," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an assertion, and not a friendly one. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Aisha Johnson." He didn't offer his hand. He simply nodded, a short, dismissive gesture. "Sterling Thorne," he said. "Taylor's father. I hope your son understands the honor we're extending, allowing him into our family." The words didn't hit me all at once. They slotted into place one by one. Honor. Allowing him. Into our family. It was as if he were talking about giving a stray cat permission to sleep in his garage. "My son is worthy of your daughter," I answered quietly. My voice didn't shake, though my hands had started to. "He is educated, kind, and hard-working." "We'll see," Sterling replied with a faint smirk. "Taylor is used to a certain lifestyle. That kind of life requires a particular level of success. Judging from where your son currently works." He let the sentence trail off deliberately. I understood. He didn't see Jerome as a man. He saw him as a salary figure that didn't impress him, a last name that didn't matter. I swallowed the anger that rose in my throat. This was Jerome's wedding day. I wouldn't ruin it for him by exploding at his father-in-law in front of everyone. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jerome and Taylor stood under an arch of white flowers in the garden, sunlight pooling around them. Taylor's dress shimmered, and Jerome's eyes shone with a tenderness that made my heart ache. When they exchanged vows, he sounded like a man who truly believed he had found his partner. Taylor's voice was soft and clear, her words perfect, and if I hadn't met her eyes before that day, I might have believed every syllable. The reception flowed with wine and laughter. Sterling moved through the crowd like a king in his court, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, trading jokes with men who looked and sounded just like him. When Jerome approached any cluster of guests, they smiled politely and then turned back to their own conversations, as if he were a pleasant distraction but not really one of them. At one point, I stepped outside to catch my breath and overheard a slice of conversation on the terrace that made my stomach twist. Sterling was standing with another man who had the soft hands and easy posture of someone who had never known a hard day of labor in his life. "So," the other man said, exhaling smoke, "you finally married off your daughter." Sterling gave a short laugh. "She fell in love," he answered. What can you do? The groom isn't exactly impressive. Some low-paid logistics workers. But that's all right. We'll shape him. Train him. Maybe someday he'll be useful. They both chuckled, and in their laughter I heard the future they imagined. My son not as a partner or equal, but as a project, something to be molded according to their expectations. In that moment, some fragile hope inside me cracked. Jerome hadn't married into a family. He had walked into a system. But weddings end, no matter how expensive the cake is. The honeymoon came and went. The glossy wedding photos were taken, framed, and displayed. Then the real work began, not just at Swiftline, but at home. Jerome and Taylor rented a 2-bedroom apartment in an upscale neighborhood, the kind where the sidewalks were smooth and lined with trees and no one hung laundry from their balconies. The rent, $1,200 a month, ate up most of Jerome's income, and Taylor made little effort to adjust her lifestyle to fit what they could realistically afford. She had grown up in a world where money was something that could be requested from her father, not earned through sweat. The first time I visited them after the wedding, I brought a cake and a bag of fruit. I wanted to see how they were settling in, to bring a bit of warmth to the new home. When Jerome opened the door, I flinched. He looked thinner. The shadows under his eyes had deepened. His shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. "Rome, are you ill?" I asked immediately, pressing my hand to his forehead. "No, Mom," he said, forcing a small smile. "Just tired. Work's been a lot. Come in." Taylor's in the living room. The apartment was tasteful and modern, full of clean lines and neutral colors. Everything looked perfectly arranged, like it belonged in a catalog. But the air felt cold, somehow. Functional, not lived in. Taylor was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She lifted her eyes briefly when I walked in. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson," she said without standing. "Hello, Taylor," I replied. "I brought cake. I thought we could have tea together." "Thanks," she said, her tone flat. "But I'm watching my figure." "Jerome, put it in the fridge." My son obediently took the cake to the kitchen, his jaw tight. I sat down in the armchair across from Taylor and tried to ignore the way she kept glancing at her screen, as if the world inside it was more interesting than anything in her own living room. "How are you both settling in?" I asked. "The apartment is lovely." "It's okay," Taylor said with a little shrug. "I would have preferred something bigger, but this is all we can manage on Jerome's salary at the moment." There was a sting beneath the words. Not our salary. His. As if she were a bystander to her own life. "Jerome earns well for someone his age," I said, unable to keep silent. "He's just starting. He has plenty of time to grow." "He's 30, she replied coolly. "That's not exactly just starting, Mrs. Johnson. Most of my college friends are already managing departments or running their own startups. Meanwhile, my husband is loading trucks for peanuts." Jerome emerged from the kitchen just in time to hear that. I saw his face tighten. "Taylor, we agreed to discuss this privately," he said in a low voice. "Not in front of my mother." "I'm only being honest," she answered, finally putting her phone down. "Dad offered you a job at his company, but you're too proud to accept. If you're going to be stubborn, then you can't complain." "I don't want to depend on your father," Jerome said quietly. "I want to earn my own place." Taylor rolled her eyes. "It's called using connections. Everyone with a brain does it. But if you're determined to cling to your principles, then I suppose we'll just keep living like this forever." The way she said, "like this," made the tidy apartment sound like a slum. I stood up, feeling a choking mix of anger and helplessness. "I should be going," I said. "You two have things to talk about." On the bus ride home, the city lights blurred through my tears. My son wasn't just tired from work. He was being chipped away from the inside, one reckless comment at a time. Late at night, when Taylor was out or asleep, Jerome began calling me more often. His voice was hushed, raw, like he was afraid someone might overhear what he was feeling. "Mom, I don't know what to do," he confessed one night. "She keeps comparing me to her friends' husbands. They're all executives, entrepreneurs. She says she married down. She said that." I whispered, stunned. "Not in those exact words," he replied. "But I can hear it. She talks about them at dinner, about their cars, their houses. Then she looks around our apartment like it's a shoebox. I work, I try, but it's never enough." "Do you still love her?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a long time. "I love the woman I thought she was," he said at last. "The version of her I met at that first business meeting. The one who laughed at my jokes and asked about my dreams. I don't know where that woman went." "You know you don't have to stay in a life that breaks you," I said gently. "Marriage should be a partnership, not a cage." "I made vows," he answered. "If there's a chance to fix this, I have to try. Maybe she's right. Maybe if I accept her father's offer, things will get better." "Don't go to work for a man you don't trust just to appease someone else," I warned. "Especially someone who used the word honor about letting you into his family." "I don't trust him," Jerome admitted softly. "But I'm running out of options. I'm tired of being disappointed in every conversation." I held the phone to my ear long after we hung up, listening to the silence and wishing I could pull him out of the life he was twisting himself into knots to maintain. 2 weeks later, he called again. "Mom, I've decided," he said. "I'm going to talk to Mr. Thorne. I'll ask him to take me into the company. Taylor is actually acting kind. I can't remember the last time she cooked for me before this." The trap had snapped shut. Jerome treated the meeting with Sterling like an exam. He pressed his shirts, polished his shoes, and sat at his small kitchen table late into the night, researching Thorne Manufacturing Group online, memorizing the company structure, and rehearsing phrases that sounded professional without being desperate. He knew he stood on uneven ground. He had experience, but not in manufacturing. A part of him understood that he would always be the son-in-law first and an employee second. The morning of the meeting, he called me. "I'm scared," he admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if he tells Taylor I'm not good enough?" "You are good enough," I replied. "You have a degree you earned, not one handed to you. You work hard. That matters." "Maybe," he said. "But in his world, the only things that matter are numbers and names. I don't have the right ones." We both knew he was right, but I didn't say so. He went to the gleaming glass headquarters of Thorne Manufacturing Group in his best suit, clutching a folder with his resume, diploma, and recommendation letters. A secretary in a sleek skirt led him down a corridor to a door with Sterling's name on it in polished metal. The office behind that door was as overwhelming as the man who occupied it. Dark wood, leather, wide windows that overlooked the city. Sterling sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, eyes already amused. "Well, son-in-law," he said without bothering with greetings, "you finally crawled over." "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," Jerome said, extending his hand. Sterling shook it like he was touching a wet cloth. "You want to work for my company?" Sterling asked. "Let's skip the rehearsed speeches. Taylor already told me the story." "Yes, sir," Jerome replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I believe I could bring value to your logistics department. I'm ready to learn and—" Sterling sliced a hand through the air, cutting him off. "Spare me. I'll hire you," he said bluntly. "Not because you're some kind of prodigy, but because you're married to my daughter, and I'm tired of hearing her complain about your paycheck." Jerome swallowed his pride. "What position?" he asked. "Assistant logistics manager," Sterling answered. "You'll make $3,800, plus bonuses if you don't screw up. That's double what you're earning now, isn't it?" "Yes," Jerome said, relief flooding him. Maybe, he thought, it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe this was the olive branch he'd hoped for. "You start Monday," Sterling continued. "Be here at 9 sharp with your documents. I run a tight ship. I don't tolerate laziness or mistakes. You'll do what you're told. Understand? Yes, Mr. Thorne, Jerome said. He walked out of that office lighter than he'd walked in. The money meant he could finally breathe, maybe even start saving for something that was his. He called Taylor the moment he stepped outside. He hired me, he said breathlessly. Assistant logistics manager. $3,800 a month. I told you, Taylor cried, delighted. Dad always takes care of family. This is the beginning of real life, Rome. That night Jerome came to my apartment, his eyes shining. Mom, this is going to change everything, he said. I'll prove myself. I'll show him I'm more than just his daughter's husband. I tried to smile. Inside, something small and stubborn whispered, he doesn't give gifts. He sets traps. But I didn't want to cast a shadow over my son's fragile relief. That weekend passed in a blur of preparation. On Sunday night, Jerome called me again, his voice buzzing with nervous energy. Big day tomorrow, he said. I don't know whether I want to throw up or run laps around the block. I'm proud of you, I told him. Whatever happens, I'm proud. On Monday morning, my phone rang at 10. The sound was frantic and uneven. When I answered, all I heard at first was my son trying to breathe. Rome. I said sharply. What's wrong? Where are you? Mom, he sobbed. Please, come. I'm at the office. I can't. I'm so ashamed. I'm coming, I said at once. Hold on. I didn't bother to change out of my work clothes. I left the grocery store mid-shift, ignoring the protest from my manager, and boarded the first bus to Thorne Manufacturing Group. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. In my mind, I cycled through every possible scenario. An accident, a terrible mistake at work, some kind of cruel prank. Whatever it was, I knew it wouldn't be something small. Jerome had never sounded like that in his life. At the front desk, I barely slowed long enough to say my son's name before rushing upstairs. A secretary tried to block me, but the urgency in my face made her falter. I wandered down a corridor, scanning doors, listening, until loud laughter snagged my attention. It came from behind a door marked, restroom. I pushed it open, and time split. My son was kneeling in front of a toilet with rubber gloves on his hands and a rag clutched in his fingers. His sleeves were rolled up, his new suit stained with water and streaks of cleaner. His eyes were red and swollen, his breath hitching. Standing beside him were Sterling and two men in suits. Clients, partners, it didn't matter. They were laughing. Come on, boy, you missed a spot, Sterling drawled, pointing with the toe of his polished shoe. There's still grime right there. What's wrong? Don't you know how to scrub? One of the other men chuckled. Sterling, you actually hired your son-in-law to do this? He asked. Sterling spread his hands in mock innocence. I always say you have to start at the bottom, he replied loudly. Let him learn the business from the ground up. Restrooms are the foundation of any respectable company, after all. Their laughter ricocheted off the walls. Mr. Thorne, Jerome whispered without looking up, you said I'd be an assistant logistics manager. Sterling leaned over him, his smile turning sharp. You are my assistant, he said. Assistant cleaner. Or did you think I'd just hand you an office position because you married my daughter? Who do you think you are? You came from a no-name company with a joke of a salary. You have nothing without us. The only valuable thing about you is that my foolish daughter decided to marry you. At that moment, Taylor appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of laughter. She took in the scene as if it were nothing more than office gossip made real. Her husband on the floor, cleaning, while her father mocked him. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Dad's right, Rome, she said lightly, her voice sweet and poisonous. You have to start at the bottom if you want to work in serious business. Consider this your training. Jerome looked up at her, eyes glistening. Taylor, he stammered. Please. Tell him. Tell him what? She asked. That my husband is too delicate to get his hands dirty? Real men work hard. If you can't manage this, how are you going to manage a department someday? Sterling turned toward her. You see, honey, he said loudly. This is what happens when you marry someone out of pity instead of staying in your lane. He kicked the bucket next to Jerome so that dirty water sloshed out, soaking my son's trousers. The other men laughed again, their amusement now tinged with discomfort. They could feel the line being crossed, but none of them stepped in to stop it. Then Jerome saw me. Our eyes met across the room, and every barrier he had tried to keep up shattered. Tears flooded his face. Mom, he whispered, his voice so small I barely heard it. I wanted to move. I wanted to lift him off that floor and drag him away, to stand between him and the man who thought humiliation was a fun pastime. But my legs felt rooted to the tile. Sterling followed Jerome's gaze and turned to me. Well, he said. The mother-in-law. Perfect timing. Take a look. Your boy's working hard. First day and already contributing. His companions shifted, glancing uneasily between us. One of them touched Sterling's arm. Maybe that's enough, he muttered. We have a meeting. Yes, Sterling said, as if the whole scene were nothing more than a joke that had run its course. Jerome, you have 1 hour to make this restroom shine. Remember, it's a 3-month probation. If you don't perform, you're out. And then dear Taylor will be without a husband and provider. We wouldn't want that, would we? He laughed once more and walked out with his clients, stepping around me as if I were invisible. Taylor followed, her perfume trailing behind her. She didn't spare me a glance. The smile still played around her mouth. When the door closed behind them, the restroom shrank back down to its ordinary size. The roar of laughter faded, leaving only the sound of my son's uneven breaths. I walked to him, my shoes splashing through the puddle on the floor, and knelt. He let the rag drop and collapsed against me like a child, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm sorry, he cried. I'm sorry you had to see this. I thought I could make it work. Rome, I whispered, cradling his head. Get up. You are not staying here. I can't leave, he said, his fingers digging into my arms. If I quit on the first day, Taylor will leave. She told me. She said I'd prove I'm worthless. You are not worthless, I said fiercely. These people are breaking you on purpose. They are not training you. They are testing how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice. But I'm her husband, he said weakly. I have to provide. I have to be strong. This is not strength, I answered. This is cruelty. And it will not stop here. But I saw the stubbornness in his eyes, the same stubbornness that had kept him studying when his friends were out playing, the same stubbornness that had carried him through school and college. Now it chained him to the idea that he had to prove something to people who would never see his worth. No matter what I said, he would stay. I walked out of that building with my chest burning and my hands shaking. The city street outside looked ordinary. People hurrying by, cars honking, buses rattling. No one knew that inside that fancy building, a man had used my son's dignity as a toy. I stopped on the sidewalk, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts until I reached a name I hadn't dialed in decades. A man who had once helped a scared young mother stand up to a husband who had run away. I pressed the call. Vaughn Law Firm, this is Darius, a familiar voice answered after 3 rings. Mr. Vaughn, I said, my voice trembling slightly. This is Aisha Johnson. I don't know if you remember me. There was a pause. Of course I remember, he said. It's been a long time. How are you? How's Jerome? Not well, I replied. I need your help. It's about a man named Sterling Thorne. The last time I had seen attorney Darius Vaughn, my hair had been darker and my son had been small enough to fall asleep in my arms in his waiting room. Back then, I had come to him with questions about child support, divorce, and survival. He had charged me almost nothing and talked to me like I was not a burden but a person deserving of justice. I had never forgotten that. Now, 30 years later, I walked into his office again, clutching the strap of my handbag like a lifeline. The building was modest, a far cry from the polished heights of Thorn Manufacturing Group, but everything inside was clean and orderly. A plaque with his name hung beside the door, the gold letters slightly worn. He stood up when I entered, his hair grayer, his face etched with lines, but his eyes as steady as ever. "Aisha," he said warmly, coming around the desk to shake my hand. "Please, sit. You look like you've carried too much on your shoulders." "I always have," I said, trying to smile. "But today is different." He poured me a glass of water and waited. When I started talking, the words came in a flood. I told him about Jerome meeting Taylor, about the wedding at the mansion, about Sterling's contempt, about the pressure on my son to work for his father-in-law. I described the scene in the restroom, every word like a stone in my throat. As I spoke, Darius's face remained calm, but I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes darkening. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Aisha," he said at last, "does Jerome know you're here?" "No," I replied. "And he mustn't. Not yet. He thinks he has to endure this to be a real man, to keep his marriage intact. If he knew what I'm planning, he might try to stop me. I can't watch that man break my son piece by piece. I won't." "What do you want?" Darius asked quietly. I met his gaze. "I want to destroy him," I said, my voice steady. "I don't mean I want to hurt him physically. I want him to feel what it's like to have everything he believes makes him powerful taken away." "Revenge is a dangerous road," Darius said. "Once you step on it, it's hard to step off. Are you prepared for what it might cost you?" "I've spent my entire life paying costs," I answered. "If this is the price of seeing my son stand tall again, I'll pay it." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Everyone has a weakness," he said. "Even men like Sterling. Give me some time. I'll look into him. His finances, his company, his history. If there's a crack, I'll find it. Come back in a week." That week crawled. Each day when I came home from work, I checked my phone for missed calls. Jerome called some nights, his voice even more tired than before. "Mom," he murmured one evening, "today he made me wash the windows for 8 hours. 32 windows. He said a manager should know how clean the glass is between the office and the world." "Quit," I begged. "Please, Rome. No job is worth your soul." "I can't," he replied. "Taylor says if I leave, she'll file for divorce. She keeps saying her friends warned her not to marry anybody. I can't stand the idea of them laughing at her because of me." "He's not making you into a man," I said. "He's making you into property." Silence hummed on the line. "Maybe I deserve it," he whispered. "Maybe I thought too highly of myself. Look at me now. I'm 30 years old and cleaning toilets." "Don't you ever say that," I snapped, more sharply than I intended. "You are not what they say you are. You are my son. You earned every step you've taken." But my words felt small against the constant drip of Sterling's poison. 8 days after our first meeting, Darius called. "Come to the office," he said. "I've found something." When I arrived, he had a thick folder on his desk, papers clipped neatly, figures highlighted. "I've looked into Thorn Manufacturing Group," he began. "On the surface, it looks solid. But the deeper I went, the more the cracks showed. Sterling is drowning in debt." He slid a sheet of paper toward me. Numbers marched across it in black ink. "He's got millions in bank loans and unpaid invoices. 3 years ago he made a series of bad investments, one especially disastrous. It swallowed more than $1 million in a single gulp. Since then, he's been juggling payments, taking out new loans to cover old ones. Production has dropped. Partners are pulling away. In plain language, he's standing on the edge of a cliff." I stared at the numbers, trying to reconcile them with the image of the man I'd seen striding around his mansion as if he owned the world. "But his house, the cars." "A facade," Darius said. Some men will drown in debt before they give up the appearance of wealth. They'd rather starve at a decorated table than admit they're hungry. A wild idea, as reckless as anything I'd ever thought, rose up inside me. What if we buy his company? I heard myself say. Darius blinked. You? Yes, I answered. Or an investor. Someone acting for me. What would it take? He picked up a pen and did quick calculations on a pad. To gain control, we'd need to buy out the bulk of his debt and enough shares to take over. Considering the size of the hole he's in, you're looking at roughly 2 million. I have 45,000 in savings, I said. My apartment is worth maybe 75 more. That's 120,000. The rest. My voice trailed off. A bank won't lend that kind of money to a 60-year-old woman with limited income, Darius said gently. Even if they did, the risk would be enormous. I know, I said. For a moment, despair washed over me. The chance to bring sterling down was there, but the distance between me and the necessary money was a canyon. Then Darius leaned back, a different light in his eyes. However, he said, there is another way. We can create a company on paper, a shell. We make it look like a serious investment firm, with a small office, some initial capital, a bit of transaction history. Your savings and the value of your apartment become the seed money. Then we seek investors, real ones, who are willing to put in the rest for shares in what we're buying. We raised enough to purchase Thorn Manufacturing Group through this company. Once the deal is done, we reveal who stands behind it. Will that be legal? I asked. Yes, he said. It's the kind of thing powerful people do all the time. We'll just be using their game against one of their own. There's a risk, Aisha. If the company can't be saved once you buy it, you could lose everything. Your home. Your savings. Every hour you've ever worked. I thought of Jerome, on his knees in that restroom. I thought of the way his voice cracked when he said he was ashamed for me to see him like that. I thought of that cruel little smile on Taylor's face, the way she looked at my son like a failed project she was ready to throw away. If it means he never has to bow to that man again, I said, I'll risk it. Then we begin, Darius said. The weeks that followed tested me in ways even my years working 3 jobs had not. I sold my apartment, the home where I had raised my son, where his childhood laughter lingered in the corners like dust. The money went straight into the new company Darius registered under the name Invest Active. I moved into a small rented place on the outskirts of the city, a cramped apartment with thin walls and mismatched furniture. It felt like going backward in time, but inside I was moving forward. Darius found 3 investors who, after reviewing his projections, agreed to put money into the venture. They didn't care about my story, only about numbers and potential profit. That was fine. I cared enough for all of us. Together with my contribution, their funds formed a solid base. The final piece came from a bank loan secured not by my name, but by the future assets of Thorn Manufacturing Group itself if the sale went through. The interest rate made me wince, but we had no choice. While we put the financial pieces in place, Jerome's life got worse. Mom, he said one night, his voice hollow. Today he made me unload a truck by myself. 8 hours straight. Heavy boxes. No break. He said managers need strong backs and no complaints if they want strong teams. This isn't a job, I said. It's a punishment. If I walk away now, he whispered, what does that make me? A man who couldn't last more than a month at his father-in-law's company. A loser. She'd be right. She's not right, I insisted. You're just the only person in that family who still recognizes abuse when you see it. But the words couldn't reach through the fog of exhaustion and shame he was drowning in. Finally, Darius told me we were ready. Invest Active had the money. The paperwork was prepared. The plan was simple. We would send an official offer to Sterling to buy out his debts and take a controlling stake in his company under terms that, given his situation, he would be almost forced to accept. Our lawyers delivered the proposal to his office. 3 days later, while Sterling and his own lawyers were still examining the offer, something happened that none of us expected but all of us needed. Jerome showed up at my door with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a bruise darkening his cheek. "Mom," he said, standing in the doorway like the world had ended. "I quit. She threw me out." We sat at my tiny kitchen table, and he told me what had happened that day. Important investors from out of town had toured the factory with Sterling. One of the restrooms had a plumbing problem, and instead of calling maintenance, Sterling had grabbed a plunger, shoved it into Jerome's hands in front of the men, and told him to fix it. "I told him no," Jerome said, his voice shaking between anger and exhaustion. "For the first time, I said no. I said I have a degree, that I'm not a janitor." He laughed and told the investors that my diploma was worth less than the toilet paper in the stall. They all laughed, Mom. They laughed, and I felt nothing inside. Just empty. I walked out, wrote a resignation letter, left it with the secretary, and went home. When he told Taylor, she had called him a coward, a failure, a disgrace to her name. Then she had thrown his clothes into a bag and told him to get out, her face twisted with anger. When he hesitated, she hit him. As he told me this, the bruise on his face darkened before my eyes. It wasn't just a mark from her hand. It was a mark from every moment he had believed he had to stay. "You are not a failure," I told him, my hands on his shoulders. "You are a man who finally walked away from a burning house before it collapsed on him." "I have nothing," he whispered. "No job. No home. No wife. I'm 30 and living with my mother again." "You have me," I said. "And more than that, you still have yourself. That's more than I can say for some people in that family." That evening, after he fell asleep on my bed like he used to when he was small, I called Darius. "He's free," I said. "He's out of there." "Good," Darius replied. "Because tomorrow, Sterling signs everything over." The next day, in a notary's office that smelled faintly of paper and ink, we sat across from Sterling and his lawyers. He looked older than he had at the wedding. His immaculate suit couldn't hide the tension in his jaw or the way his hand shook when he lifted his pen. "As we discussed," the notary said, sliding the contract forward, "this is the agreement transferring the controlling stake in Thorn Manufacturing Group to Invest Active." Sterling glanced at Darius. "You represent Invest Active," he said gruffly. "Who exactly am I selling my company to?" "That's a reasonable question," Darius answered. "The company exists on paper, but behind it stands a real person. The investor who gathered the funds and made this purchase possible. Under the terms of this agreement, that person has the right to reveal themselves at the moment of signing. I'd like to exercise that right." He turned and looked at me. "Aisha," he said, "this is your moment." I stood up, my knees trembling slightly, and stepped forward. "You're selling your company to me, Mr. Thorne," I said quietly. "To Aisha Johnson." For a heartbeat, he didn't react. Then the meaning sank in. He pushed his chair back so hard it screeched across the floor. "This is a joke," he snapped. "She can't buy my company. She has nothing." "The funds are real," one of his lawyers said. Flipping through the documents Darius slid over. "Bank transfers, loan agreements, investor contracts. Everything is in order." "You wanted money," Darius said calmly. "You're getting it. What difference does it make whose hands it came from?" Sterling's gaze bounced between me and the papers, his face flushing then draining of color. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "I worked," I replied simply. "I was saved. I sold my apartment. I invested everything I had and found people willing to join me. You humiliated my son for months. You made him kneel in filth and called it training. You used your power to crush his spirit, and you laughed while you did it. This is the bill, Mr. Thorne. It's time to pay. If you refuse," the notary added, "you'll owe a large penalty under the preliminary agreement, and the banks are prepared to move on your remaining assets. You can walk out of here with money to pay your debts, or you can walk out with nothing. The choice is yours, but you don't have much of one. His own lawyers leaned in and spoke quietly to him, their words soft but urgent. I didn't need to hear to know what they were saying. This is the best you're going to get. In the end, pride bowed to desperation. His hand shaking, Sterling signed. One document, then another, then another. Each stroke of his pen severed him from the company he had used as a throne. The transfer is complete, the notary announced. From this moment, the controlling interest of Thorn Manufacturing Group belongs to Ms. Aisha Johnson. I picked up another document Darius had prepared and set it on the table. This is my first act as owner, I said. Effective immediately, you are removed from all positions in the company. You may collect any personal belongings from your office today. Security will escort you out. You can't do this, he spat. I can, I replied. And I just did. If you like, I added, unable to resist, I could offer you a job. There's an opening for a restroom cleaner. The pay is modest, but it's a start. I hear it builds character. For a moment, I thought he would lunge across the table. His face twisted with fury, and his hands balled into fists. Instead, he grabbed the nearest folder and flung it against the wall. Papers scattered like defeated birds. You'll regret this, he snarled. Both of you. Maybe. Maybe not. But as he stormed out of the office, his steps unsteady, I felt something inside me unclench for the first time in months. That evening, in my small rented apartment, I sat across from Jerome and told him everything. I watched his expression as I explained selling my home, creating the company, bringing in investors, and buying out his tormentor's kingdom. He listened in stunned silence. Why? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you risk everything for this? Because you are my son, I said simply. For 30 years, I've watched the world test you. I could not stand back while one man tried to destroy you for his own amusement. I couldn't give you an easy childhood. But I could give you this chance. What chance? He asked. I slid another document across the table. The chance to build something better, I said. Tomorrow you walk into that company, not as a toilet cleaner, not as a son-in-law, but as its chief executive officer. If you want the job. He stared at me. Mom, I can't run a company, he said. I barely know where to start. You know more than you think, I replied. You understand logistics. You understand hard work. Most importantly, you know what it feels like to be at the bottom. You will never treat people the way he did. And you won't be alone. Darius will help you. I'll be there as a member of the board. We'll learn together. Or if you don't want it, we'll hire someone else. But I wanted you to have the choice that man tried to steal from you. The choice to stand tall. He looked down at the document, then back at me. Slowly, a spark returned to his eyes. If I do this, he said, I want to do it right. No games. No humiliation. No lies. Then we'll do it your way, I said. The months that followed were hard, but in a different way than the ones before. Jerome, thrown into the deep end of leadership, learned to swim. He spent long hours in the office, not barking orders from behind a desk, but walking through the factory, talking to workers, listening to their complaints and ideas. He discovered neglected talents, restructured departments, cut wasteful spending, renegotiated contracts with suppliers who had nearly given up on Thorn Manufacturing Group. The first income he insisted on clearing was the employees' overdue wages. People who had grown used to empty promises began to believe again when they saw money in their accounts. Where Sterling had ruled through fear and humiliation, Jerome led with respect and accountability. Within a year, the company, now renamed Johnson Holdings, had pulled itself back from the brink. The debts were being paid. The factory lines hummed. The atmosphere changed. People laughed in the corridors without glancing over their shoulders. No one was made to kneel on restroom tiles. Some time later, Taylor called. Jerome told me about the conversation over a simple dinner at my table. She said she was wrong, he said. She said she loved me, that she made a mistake, that she was under pressure from her father, that she wants to come back now that things are different. "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told her I forgave her," he replied. "But I also told her I don't want her in my life. That respect is not something you reclaim once you've thrown it away like trash." She didn't give up immediately. She turned up at the office once, standing in the lobby in an expensive dress, her expression contrite. Security escorted her out on Jerome's orders. That door, once closed, stayed closed. As for Sterling, life did to him what he had tried to do to others. Without his company, his debts caught up with him. He sold the mansion, the cars, the furniture, piece by piece, until all that remained was a small rental far from the glossy neighborhoods he used to boast about. The last time I saw him was in a discount grocery store. He was standing at the counter counting crumpled bills, his shoulders hunched, his once flawless suit replaced with a worn jacket. He didn't see me. I walked past in quiet silence. I felt no triumph, no gloating, just a simple understanding. Life had placed him exactly where his choices had led him. Jerome moved into a modest but comfortable home, not in a gated community but in a neighborhood where children rode bikes on the street and neighbors waved from their porches. He met a woman named Chloe at a charity event, an architect with thoughtful eyes and a warm laugh. She didn't ask about his income when they met. She asked what books he liked, what he wanted his life to stand for. When he brought her to meet me, I saw the way she looked at him, not as a stepping stone or a project, but as a partner. After they married in a small ceremony surrounded by real friends instead of social climbers, I stood beside him and Chloe and felt a peace I had never known at that mansion wedding. 2 years later, I held my grandson in my arms, a tiny boy with Jerome's eyes and Chloe's smile. They named him Kai. As I rocked him gently, the years collapsed. I remembered holding Jerome in our cramped apartment while bills piled up on the table, and now here I was, in a home full of warmth and stability, cradling the next generation. I'm 65 now. My body is slower, my hair is more silver than black, but my heart is less burdened than it has ever been. I live in a small but cozy place, my walls decorated with drawings my grandson makes and photos of my son in a suit that truly belongs to him. I sit on my balcony in the evenings sometimes, watching the sun dip behind the buildings, and I think about the day I saw Jerome kneeling on that restroom floor. I don't regret a single choice that came after. I didn't risk everything for money or revenge, though those were the tools I used. I did it so my son would never again doubt his own worth. I did it to show him, and myself, that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to strip another person of their dignity and walk away laughing. This is not just a story about business deals and payback. It's a story about a mother's love, stubborn and unyielding. It's about a man who learned that being a real man has nothing to do with how much humiliation he can swallow and everything to do with how he treats the people below him when he finally stands tall. And it's a reminder that justice does not always arrive on its own. Sometimes, it has to be dragged into the light by someone who refuses to look away.